Welcome, everyone. This is now day 3 of our Advent reading through the book of Isaiah, 3 chapters a day. Today, we are reading chapters 7, 8, and 9. And this is where it starts to get a bit more challenging. Don't give up yet, please. I said in one of the previous videos that this is some of the richest literature in all of the Bible. And yet, it's also some of the most dense. And so there's complicated places to work through. And we are going to continue to see the dualism of the optimism as well as pessimism. When we were in chapter 6 yesterday, it was still poetic, but yet it was placing it within its historical context. Uzziah had died, long reigning king, and now because of the stable king of Judah had died, there was uncertainty what's going to happen next. Now, one thing I should mention, otherwise you may get confused, is after the time of David's son Solomon, Israel essentially divided into two kingdoms. The kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And so that's important to recall, because you'll read about Judah and Israel, and they are two distinguished places during this time. However, yet they're still part of the original people of God. They've just had their own problems, and that's for another study. So Isaiah encounters Ahaz, who is reigning now, the son of Uzziah, and we get some glimpses of the geopolitical paradigms at play. The Assyrian Empire is rising. They're marching from place to place, conquering and subduing people, and they're moving closer and closer to Israel and Judah. Now, the kings of Israel and Syria have formed an alliance to protect them against Assyria. And they want Judah and Ahaz here to join with them. However, they also want to overthrow Ahaz and put in their own puppet ruler in Ahaz's stead. So Ahaz is confused. He's torn between two options, a rock and a hard place. Does he remain independent, which would most likely mean he will succumb to the Assyrian invasion, or does he go into this pact with Syria and Israel, something else that he's not comfortable with? Isaiah here, the prophet, is going to have a third option, and that's do neither, but completely surrender yourself to God and trust in God. And while that might sound appealing to Ahaz, that is a bit more than what Ahaz is willing to accept. So Isaiah is responding, and it's a pronouncement of what's going to happen. But from this, we get one of the most well-known passages in all of Scripture. If I was quoting it from the from the King James English, you would remember it well. You may have noticed it as you came here into chapter 7, verse 14. The Lord will give you a sign. A young woman will conceive, and give birth to a son, and you will name him Emmanuel. Now, in the first context here, this isn't referring to Jesus at all. This is referring to some child that is going to be born, named Emmanuel. The child will grow older, and before the child knows how to reject evil and choose what is right, the land is going to be desolate. So this child, when this child was born, they knew the clock was counting downward, and before this child hit a certain stage of maturity, it was going to be bad. As you read through chapter 7 and into chapter 8, that you could read the land was going to be so devastated and depopulated by the Assyrians that cultivation was going to be impossible, and any inhabitants of the land would have to live off of animals as well as any wild food that they could gather. Now, when we go to the New Testament and to Matthew's Gospel, here in that story, this same passage, 7:14, is taken to use to apply to Jesus. This is what we call a certain a prophetic dualism. It meant one thing in Isaiah's generation, but yet now it means it meant another thing in Jesus' generation. Now, Matthew may have been credible to do that. However, I'm not credible to do that. And so for me, I'm not able to take scripture and use it out of context to turn it into something that was different and make it into a dualistic approach. But Matthew was able to do that, and throughout, and there was some precedent there throughout Jesus' ministry. Maybe we see this more in Luke. Isaiah is something of a backdrop. The Jesus quote is very fond of quoting from Isaiah. It was a very important book in his time. In Jesus' first sermon in the book of Luke at Nazareth, he is quoting from and reading from Isaiah. And while there's many historical distinctions between first century Israel and the time of Isaiah, yet there's still parallels that are going on and things that we'll get to as we continue through this study in the weeks to come. And so, as it goes into chapter number 8, we have the more of the depressing kind of literature. Once again, that there's going to be a time of darkness, as it were. But therein, God is encouraging Isaiah and still giving hope, pointing to a time when things will be better. And that's very much the book of Isaiah is twofold in that regard. And then it get even more so into chapter number 9. It speaks of the gloom being dispelled and the light beginning to shine once again. The people walking in darkness see a bright light. The light shines on all who live in a land of deep darkness. Their oppressive yoke and the club that strikes their shoulders, the cudgel that the oppressor uses on them, you've shattered as in the day of Midian's feet. And so it's very melancholy, contrasted with optimism. And here, once more, in chapter number 8, we find this well-known passage, chapter number 9, in verse 6. A child has been born, a son has been given. He shoulders responsibility, and he is called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. And it goes on that he will rule on David's throne and in David's kingdom, establishing it and strengthening it. Once again, I already mentioned how the kingdom was divided during this time. The kingdom looked like it had no prospects of coming together, but yet there's going to be this child that is going to come with all of these wonderful attributes, and he will rule on David's throne and David's kingdom, establishing it and strengthening it. He's going to be the one that pulls it back together. And in the same way that in the previous videos, I mentioned that Isaiah was talking about the future Jerusalem, the future temple, the permanent temple in Jerusalem that Jesus would come to establish. Here, in the same way, this is the dominion and the rule of David's throne and David's kingdom that Jesus was coming to establish. And he says it will strengthen by promoting justice and fairness. And you'll recall that in the previous videos that one of the issues that were recurrent in Isaiah's prophecy was that there was no justice in the land, there was no fairness. People were taken advantage of, and the poor were being forgotten. And at this point, we're 10 minutes in. I will leave it there and look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow.